Resolved. The U.S. should substantially increase its support for deep-sea mining aids and for the first time on August 2012. India built rare earth minerals mining processing plant in the state of Orissa and developed technology to mine nearby waters. The two is that India is continuing to increase the program. In September, they aim to deal with Japan to increase rare earth element production via deep-sea mining within their exclusive economic zones. 3 of the state-owned companies in India have issued new licenses to engage in rare earth element mining right now. We say that they, yeah, that's the plan. The USFG should provide $300 million to India for use in India's deep-sea mining of rare earth minerals. Again, the USFG should provide $300 million to India for use in India's deep-sea mining of rare earth minerals. Copy. Solvency. This guarantees at least 4 different bases. China built base for deep-sea mining. It costs about $80 million. So the plan's probably going to be able to produce several other bases, for at least 3, or hopefully even 4, and thus advantage 1. China. One chance China's expanding deep-sea mining to maintain regional hegemony in the status quo. In 2013, they built an $80 million deep-sea base off of its eastern coast. The base is miles from the headquarters of China's North Sea, which is critical to the Yellow Sea. Basically, the base is stationed on the coastal of China. It's up to critical for power protection across the entirety of the Yellow Sea. And China's using the deep-sea bases as the means of establishing regional hegemony. And this is especially critical for impacting both Japan and the Koreas because they depend on the Yellow Sea in order to be able to have crucial shipping routes, and also are depending on the Yellow Sea for their ship and for their extraction resources. The two is China's expansion will necessarily implicate India. The latest India is looking east, Modi's court, Abe and other East Asian leaders continue looking to other Southeast Pacific nations in order to be able to expand its influence. India's going to be increasingly concerned with Chinese expansion in any form because he's basically going to be, he understands China to be the closest reachable threat. He says any expansion of China's hegemony is being threatened. They'll see is that he's specifically interested in rare earth elements. On September 4th, he agreed to a deal with Japan in case he is currently cooperating with Japan right now. The links. First, the plan checks China. It solidifies India's direct challenge to China. This question said that you could look to the empiric of the border as the most heavily militarized border in the world. Yet China has refused to act in this region because they understand that India is a credible military threat. This is the plan to force China to back down in South China Sea. The two is the plan for its credible alliance between India, Japan, and the United States. So this is going to be a critical try to be able to deter China on this question. Basically, be encircle them and guarantee that China is still going to not be able to expand any further on the South China Sea. On South China Sea, they will just be able to use the rare earth element mining bases for except that it's supposed to be just for mining, not for actually using for middle operations. The United States will investment will eventually solve for China in the long term. As the United States investment in India guarantees that India will be able to get that product out faster, meaning China will not be able to use rare earth elements to be able to put a strength on the rest of the planet. Basically, currently China controls within 95% of the world's rare earth elements, and they use that to be able to extort other countries by not selling very much of the plans. Going to be able to check against this because India will be able to have access to a lot of them. Thus, the term links. This first argument that getting access to rare earth elements being critical to supporting an independent war in Congress. He says Congress is actually critical for rare earth elements right now. Japan's looking to them in the status quo. He said that the only world where they would go to war over the Scotland is the world where they're forced to. He said that the only world where they're forced to is the world where they do not have access to any other forms of energy because China is hoarding all of these resources. We said that this would create a economy that's most favorable for China because basically China is able to play the role of being a defender because Japan makes the first move that's because their economy forces them to do so. Guarantees that China will have a lot of international credibility in this question and they will feel that they have the authority to be able to decisively start against China, against Japan. This guarantees a massive war because basically alliances and partnerships would draw the United States in to support Japan on one side and China will be on the other. Means we see a massive war between multiple powers. The two is that China and India will go to war, which would be inevitably culminate in extinction. And a war where China is going to be able to expand its rare earth elements control over the entirety of the South China Sea dramatically. It's going to continue to be perceived as a threat to Indian regional hegemony. Where India is not able to check back against this with the deep sea mining, which is an asymmetrical advantage that only China would hold. Basically, this guarantees that India is going to be able to going to feel that they're basically back to the corner. They're going to be forced to strike out against China. This guarantees a high risk of conflict where when it go nuclear because India will perceive asymmetrical and massive and rapid nuclear strike as its only option because China will be others be able to completely control the seas. Thus, advantage 2 is black hats. Uniqueness. First, India has a massive shortage of rare earth elements in the South Pole. Then I looked to their recent expansions to DC mining as well as trying to mine more traditionally in sub-Saharan Africa. Philippines, India is trying to transfer away from what they don't have the resources. China controls roughly 99% of rare earth elements, and which are critical for things like solar and wind development. We'll see is that the global demand for rare earth elements is expected to double from 2010 to 2015, indicates that rare earth elements will become even more popular right now. And the little D is that critical material is to rise. Rare earth element prices are killing the ability to transition to all forms of alternative energy. It means it's critical for alternative energy to choose India. That's the amount of energy storage in the cycle. According to the Z research group, and the energy storage for India was only 5.1%. That means that they are only be able to provide energy for 95% of their country. The remaining 5% is basically just left to stay for perpetual blackout. But these shitty purple blackouts that it happens basically at random because their power plants will just fail in different areas. Guarantees that their entire countries at risk of abuse of blackout happens commonly just to especially severe effects for only 300 million different people that they didn't have access to power for extended amounts of time, as much as weeks. Let's see, according to Bloomberg, inactive coal supplies are going to lead to a massive increase in blackouts right now. India basically just led to had a judicial decision that banned coal mining within India means that they do have access to adequate amount of energy right now. Guarantees the plans have critical to give access to renewable energy for resources. That's the links. First plan here means that you will give access to a massive amount of energy and faster the rate of rare earth elements are critical to things like solar and wind as well as alternative energy more broadly. So the plan is going to necessitate a massive increase in this because the seabed is rich in rare earth elements and rare earth minerals. It has more rare earth elements that are on that are within the land. Guarantees that the sea is going to be much critical. Obviously, the amount of water area of the entire planet that's underwater is larger than the area that is covered in land. It seems pretty intuitive. The two plans going to give the necessary seed money to allow the expansion to go forward. So the plan is sufficient to get kickstart the Indian product and guarantee that it will be able to become fully independent in the future. The three plan is impetus to shift away from the coal. They ban their mining. It's just a question of how they will replace that. Will they increase their reliance on other countries and import more coal, or will they attempt to ship it something else? And the plans up to critical at this junction. That's the internal links. First, the Indian coal need is necessarily really bad because these things like environmental racism. Basically, the coal plants and the factories that burn coal are located in the poorest areas of India. These areas are places where people are basically forced to breathe in the nasty coal mud. The two is the blackouts are critical to prevent because they kill lots and lots of people. If a hospital is a blackout, that means that every single person that's on life support there dies. The people that require critical medical support will die. The three is the blackouts will kill their economy, costing India back warp. So that Modi's running his entire platform is on basically improving India's economy. Where that's not true, he'll refer to as parliamentary ways. That's the impact of social structure rates. Those are the values of the world structural racism becomes massive, and this leads to things like basically leads to a systemic discrimination against Muslims in particular in India. These are the people who live in primarily the lowest, worst off areas that choose to impact war, uniquely devastating war. India is supposed to go hardline and go incur into the capital region. Thus, that makes war inevitable.
Either, yeah, second one.
I'm going to flow the K on one sheet of paper, if that's okay.
Alright. You can flow it however you like.
Sweet. Case in order, you want the solvency sheet?
Mm-hmm.
Sweet.
Everybody ready?
First off, case position top county support is the interpretation support means to incentivize private companies to develop deep sea mining. Once again, support means to incentivize private companies. These violations that the affirmative incentive gives money directly to India in order to do this. The standards first predictability. There are infinite number of ways that they can go in different countries that they could have given the money to necessarily. And there's no way, no access to predictability for us, and that only private companies necessarily have the not only the infrastructure but also the connection with the United States in order to be able to resolve the predictability is necessary for access to ground for us to be able to prevent to necessarily necessary seconds limits is there are a number of different ways to support the alternate. There are an infinite number of ways for the affirmative to support if DC mining through different alternative actors. Only the privatization and having a depth of a breadth discussion necessary to avoid the best access to debate. These voters first have equity only debate relative to the ground. Will both be able to show up debate. Second, education purpose debate is to increase education. Now, this group people join debate. 30 should value top gallery. 3 programs competing interpretations. We can chart their interpretation superior through the shared debate. Then you should vote to ratify the issues of fairness in education and reasonability leads to the race of the bottom and justify such intervention necessary. Anything you should protect it. Next off the criticism, money, go manager. A, the framework versus the interpretation that the affirmative gets one conditional test of the methodology of the affirmative. Interpretation of the negative gets one methodological test of the affirmative. Second, the role of the ballot is to endorse the team that best methodologically engages with the environment. The role of the ballot is to endorse the team that best methodologically engages with the environment. Third, that the honest illusory plan test doesn't actually happen after we live this round. That you should only be evaluated within our methodology and how we interact with the world in order to be able to affect this force. That critique comes first. Is that methodology informs our policy making that the way that we approach something important. informs the way that we actually take the action necessary. Means that the methodology has to come first, and the little bees that approximately impact should come first because the method not only is the most probable, but also is the ones that affect us the most, and that allows us to be able to engage them in order to resolve these internal conflicts. These links first that the affirmative use of the environment as a resource pool in order to be this justifies the managerialist policies in order to be able to in order to allow for them for all sorts of violence against the environment. That the way that they view the environment as only a way to in order to get more resources necessary means that there's no ability they should justify and continuing on any policies of managerialism. Additionally, sections that the affirmative use humans as superior to the environment, or the way that they view the environment necessarily means that there's no that humans are the only ones that have access and value within this system necessarily means that there's that they continue this secular superiority and that is necessary for us to be able to break down. The impacts first that this leads to systemic environmental collapse that the way that they don't understand the entire way that the environment works, and rather there's no way to completely understand the way the environment works means that these policies of managerialism inevitably lead to environmental collapse. There's no mechanism for us to be able to truly understand the way this works, and only by truly breaking down this understanding are we able to resolve this petition. Second, that their approach of superiority necessarily means that by viewing one thing as less than us, then this justifies further forms of violence against other individuals. That when we view ourselves as superior to one thing, that necessarily means we can lead to view ourselves as superior to the other. This necessarily leads to the inevitability of violence as we view ourselves superior to all other understandings. That's the alternative. Reject the managerialism of the PMC and embrace deep ecology. Once again, reject the managerialism of the PMC and embrace deep ecology.
Can I have text, please?
Sure. I will give it to you in a moment.
Okay.
Alternative solvency first is that the increasing solves the affirmative better by working by action, engaging with the environment. Deep ecology looks at the interconnectedness of the environment and how we work within it. This necessarily means that we have to reject the understanding of the resource of the way we view the environment only as a trading on resources, but rather we have to do our actions in a sustainable way. And this resolves not only all the internal conflicts about the way that we engage with the environment, but also resolve all the harm that you talk about. Additionally, second is the permutation will fail. That our ideology is rooted within our action, and the permutation would necessarily lead to co-optation and co-optation bar the way that we reframe our understanding and leads to the corruption of the usage of deep ecology. Necessarily means that this would be intrinsically worse. Additionally, the affirmative can't separate from the representation of the PMC. They are advocating throughout the entirety of the affirmative that we need to take this managerialist approach. Necessarily means that it means that they can't sever their understanding. I'll take the question.
How are we co-optation? Like, if the state exists, how do you not?
This isn't an argument about the way the state is bad, but rather the way that we interact with the environment is bad. Thus, the way that your understanding functions would co-opt this reframing. On case, starting in solvency. First argument is trying to use that you lead to environmental collapse that delays that current commercial ocean operations rarely actually interact with the seafloor and focus more on individual drilling farming processes. The little bees that seabed mining vacuums up the first several layers of the seabed in order to be able to get access to resources means that this leads to a significant amount of excess rock and silt that we have in storage. We'll see that this tends to be dumped as a slurry of trunk rocks and dirt at the ocean surface. The little D's that this would necessarily lead to the death of the marine ecosystem for a couple of reasons. Not only would this lead to the death of bottom dwelling life and the mid-level aquatic life by blocking their ability to see, but also it clogs up the gills by the excess silt that's in the water means that this would lead to substantial death and the marine ecosystem probably lead to collapse. This would also has an intrinsic impact to the death of millions of fish species, but also lead to the death of 1 billion people who rely on ocean fish populations for access to food. Necessarily means this lead to a substantial impact as a result of that. Additionally, the next round is trying to destroy coral reefs. That the resources that are located in these regions are largely near coral reefs, and that the affirmative tries to increase deep sediment mining makes it profitable overall means it would lead to more mining overall, especially in areas where coral reefs are. This construction and excess silt damaging coral reefs as a result of not only the construction by hitting coral reefs, but also the excess silt stops the actual growth process means that coral reefs can't regenerate in order to be able to resolve a lot of the internal harm in order to resolve in order to decrease ocean acidification. This is the argument we're going for. Coral reefs are key to solve for ocean acidification as they absorb a lot of the excess acid that's within the ocean. That absent these, they would lead to substantial acidification of the ocean that would lead to marine ecosystem collapses. The ocean become toxic to fish population, would lead to the death of millions of fish species and the impacts we talked about above. Additionally, Next argument is going to be turned to the Pakistan backlash that the Pakistan is currently checked by a strong United States and by a strong U.S.-Pakistan relationship that we provide food aid and flood aid to them in the past, and that we maintain a strong military relationship. The plan breaks down this relationship by siding with India, who has been seen as an enemy in the past. This means the Pakistan would try to assure control over the Kashmir region, which is currently being checked. And mean that this would lead to only an escalatory conflict by India, but also lead to substantial violence within the Kashmir region, as Pakistan has systemically oppress the individuals in the Kashmir region. This leads to systemic violence. But on advantage one, their first argument is going to be not meet that they can that India and China have been engaged in bilateral treaties of cooperation and increasing relations in the past means that none of your argumentation about India working as a check troop. Additionally, the next argument is trying that you stop the WTO challenge against China because of the fact that there's a challenge going through the WTO now, and that by opening up new markets for various minerals that prevents any future challenge means that this means China always resource control. Additionally, the next argument is going to be that there's going to be no turn link that China will always assert control over the Senkaku Islands is an issue of nationalism, not an issue of resources. Because it means that conflict is inevitable. But additionally, on advantage two. First argument is no solvency. The technology is first argument is status quo solves that India has been moving towards solar technology, and the status quo necessarily means that they've been looking towards China in order to be able to get access to rare earth minerals. Means that all of your arguments doesn't matter. Additionally, the next argument is India is focusing on things like molten salt reactors. Means that all of your arguments about REMs just aren't necessary.
Okay.
Sorry, and I will write you a text real quick.
Oh, that would be great, thank you. Okay, order will be T. The solvency now. Advantage 1, advantage 2. And K, straight down.
Assuming you solve something going straight down the app, right?
Yeah, exactly. After the same order. Cool. Anyone not ready? Cool. Oops.
Yeah.
Cool. First on topic how is the counter-interpretation support means increased general support. The resolution says that the U.S. country should increase its support for rare earth minerals. That says nothing about privatization. It also does not indicate privatization. The next argument is that you have not stipulated that we would not be supporting private companies in India, and you do not specify that these private companies have to be within the United States. The fact that private companies do exist in India and would necessarily engage in mineral mining probably means that we definitely do meet your interpretation. The next argument is on standard GC predictability, but we say that the U.S. doesn't have any rare earth mineral mining plans and has no plans to do so in the future. Indicate that there is absolutely no literature base that would say that the U.S. would give it to private companies or would do it within the U.S. Indicate that is absolutely not true, and that we are the most predictable literature base, especially since India has been asking for more support for its rare earth minerals. Indicate that probably the U.S. would have done so. Yeah.
There's a finite number of countries that have the ability to do this. There's an infinite number of companies that could do
Yes.
it.
The next one is your interpretation is absolutely impossible for the affirmative to do because there are a finite number of companies that have access to rare earth mineral areas. Indicate that the U.S. would never be able to do so, or would be able to supply private companies within the U.S. Indicates your interpretation would be necessarily very unfair for the affirmative because you would force us to do something impossible that you would that would garner no offense for us. Next, there are infinite ways for the U.S. to support that. My argument just answers that. That's fine on voters. First, the U.S. assess reasonability. Reasonability means that the affirmative wins one offensive counterstatement. We say that we are best for predictability and also for finite limits on the resolution. But also, we are the best in order for education because we allow us to talk about the ways that alternative energy and international relations intersect. Your argument, particularly that we only give it to private companies that we don't talk about international relations, probably indicates that we are the best for education. But also, we say that you should not vote on competing interpretations of judge and intervention because if we're reasonably within the topic and allow you offense to your positions, that probably means you're good. Also, you should vote on proven abuse. They have not stipulated what positions they have lost because of the affirmative we read indicates that there was literally no proven abuse and they have not read any reason why potential abuse is a reason to vote negative. Solvency. You say environmental collapse because of ocean operations. Several arguments. First one is the environmental collapse is inevitable. Anyway, the first is that the amount of garbage that exists in the ocean makes biodiversity collapse absolutely inevitable. The second argument is that agricultural runoff causes algae blooms that kill fish. The third is that nuclear radiation seeps into the ocean and makes fish literally bleed out of their gills. All of these things are increasing. The text indicates that it is trying to for earth minerals to resolve these kinds of energy forms. The fourth reason is that oil spills are inevitable and obviously kill a huge amount of people and devastate plant life and kill coral reefs. The fifth argument is that there is no such thing as a keystone species. just on all of your biodiversity arguments go away. The little is that 99% of all species that have ever existed have gone extinct, which means there's no way to isolate which species or what plants or coral reef died that would necessarily cause environmental collapse. But the sixth one is that the deep sea exploration for oil has the exact same policies and that exists in the status quo indicates that there's no reason why rare earth mineral mining would be necessarily bad. But the next argument is that there are actually the regions within the deep sea are especially isolated little A's. The species are extremophiles. They live in places where not very many other animals live that don't have any natural predators or other animals that they eat, which means that even if the plant affects them, it means that that doesn't necessarily have absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the environment. The next is that everything that you thought was a keystone species is not the little A's. The bees might extinct due to non-preference in China, which is a massive agricultural resource, and that triggered absolutely nothing. But also salmon in the Atlantic Ocean were considered a keystone species for forever. They might extinct a little bit, nothing happened, and there is absolutely no impact. The ecological devastation of the U.S. The next argument is on the coral reef today. We see that reserve were able to check. Obama just created a reserve for coral reefs. That means that they are able to retain enough. Also, he just pledged a bunch of money to retain the ones in Australia, which are the bigger, most critical ones. Which means that we were able to solve back for that and work with the plan. But the next argument is that 90% of the coral reefs are already dead, and there's no propensity for you to turn back time, and it does not collapse the environment. It indicates that there is no reason why 1% more killing of the coral reefs would necessarily be worse, which is fine. Yeah. Pakistan backlash. Yeah, what's up?
They need to isolate Indian reefs as unique the key bay about that, so nor that isolate Chinese.
The negative opinion isolate why Indian or Chinese coral reefs necessarily key. They say they have not done that, but additionally we would argue that the vast majority of coral reefs that exist in Australia. Also, you can see that China is already doing rare earth mineral stuff, which means that they would have already collapsed all the coral reefs there. Is that better for India to get in there? Next is the Pakistan backlash. The first is the relations with Pakistan are absolutely low. We have not increased trade with them, but additionally, they absolutely hate us for our military operations. Using the relations are high because of food, and that is simply not sufficient. Pakistan has repeatedly condemned us for our drone attacks in the region because they are a violation of their territorial sovereignty. They say repeatedly we did not promise. Also, we didn't even tell them that we were killing Osama bin Laden in the region. Indicates the relations are not high. The second argument is that the nuclear deal that we signed with India in 2003 should have already triggered because we literally sell India a bunch of nuclear technology that makes it pretty easy for them, that allowed them to become a nuclear weapon state. That obviously would have triggered Pakistani backlash much worse. But additionally, we say, the third argument is that Modi literally just came to the U.S. to discuss with Obama about how to counterback for China, but which means that should have already triggered your next. But the next argument is that you conceded that the affirmative would actually necessarily be framed in terms of countering China, which means that Pakistan would perceive it not as an attack on them, but certainly an attack on China, which Pakistan is also concerned about because the Pakistan would like the plan. Advance one. Yeah. You see that India and China have increased bilateral treaties, but you can see that China still has control over all of their earth minerals. The bilateral treaties are simply not sufficient to save for their relations, and you will already concede that China is using them to violate territorial sovereignty. You said this would stop them with a WTO challenge on China. You have not indicated what the nature of the challenge is or what it would look like or why you would stop it. You literally just say that it would stop it. There's literally no warrant for that position. Next to that China would go for this because of nationalism. You can see the exact link argument that says that the reason China would be able to counter Japan is because they would have international credibility in the world of Japan is forced to. You can see that the plan would not force Japan to go into the Senkakus for earth minerals. Your argument refers to China's nationalism, not Japan, and see that is not true. Obviously, China's nationalism does not allow for international credibility that would justify them attacking Japan. Yeah.
And new market makes the WTO challenge relevant.
Yeah. Also, that would make the WTO challenge relevant. Advantage 2. You said the steps goes up because they are moving to alternative energy. I'm sorry, but this goes the wrong direction. You can see the exact argument that says that rare earth minerals are absolutely key to allowing for alternative energy. That's the first argument on this advantage, which means that if they are moving toward alternative energy, they need the rare earth minerals in order to be able to do that. You've already also conceded that the India Supreme Court shut down all but 2 of their coal plants, which means the rare earth minerals are absolutely critical to filling the demand energy in the status quo. You've also conceded that they have a massive energy shortage and they must act to fill it, which means the rare earth minerals are the only way for them to do it, given that they shut down coal. Also, salt reactors not sufficient. You conceded that they got rid of all their coal. Rare earth minerals are also key to alternative energy, and you see that is where they are going to considering the impacts framework. Counter-interpretation is that the judge should evaluate the impacts of the criticism and the policy impacts on an equal basis, policy and critical impacts on an equal basis. Yeah. You said that the ballot should endorse whoever should engage in the environment. You said that the ballot should assess the impact quickly and use the framework of net benefits. You said that the fiat is illusory. You said that everyone knows fiat is not, but it's still a critical tool of the imagination, and the consequentialism is good because absolutely did function islands because we never look at the impacts. You said the methodology is a part question. That is not true methodology. Good methodology can equal bad policy like the penicillin. That was literally invented by accident. Also, good methodology can equal bad policy like Iraq. The democracy was actually bad thing. You said the practical impacts. And first, we said that is not true. The practical impacts allow us to turn a blind eye to the disposable population that exists in India, which is a reason why we should necessarily find that all. Also, there's literally no reason why your impacts are more proximal than ours, because we were able to solve back for that anyway. On the impacts. We said the managerialism is good for several reasons. You said we can't explain nature, but we said the scientists are able to explain a large part of it and showing the way that we are able to use it. The Libya is absolutely key to allocating resources. Only when we look at the environment is something that can be managed and can be ordered, are we able to harness the potential and allow humans to survive in a world we reject all managerialism whenever it seems to be absolutely must prioritize humans in a world we say that coral reefs are more important than human lives. You allow populations in India to die, to continue to not be supported just because you don't want a few plants to die, even though that is already inevitable. The next argument is that all of our reasons why environmental collapse is inevitable is the reason why you assess the likelihood and importance of the criticism is very low. The next argument is the government managerialism is to preventing individual actors. Your stipulation, obviously individuals would still set fires or do bad things to the environment, and is absolutely managerialism is key to establishing norms of engaging the environment that prevent these from internalizing the alternative is never able to solve cases necessarily deceptive the alternative because you don't include the plain text. But the next argument is that given that managerialism is inevitable, we say that or permutation do both. That's key because since it's inevitable, we should probably have something that changes the norms of it.
I like the T on top, followed by the alternative, the links, the impacts, and the framework.
All links, impacts, framework, so backwards.
Yep.
Or except for the index lines. And then
Do it, yeah.
And then K straight out.
Yeah.
On the topic of you can extend that we beat the I didn't hear a reverse voting issue, but you're never going to be voting on that anyway. The affirmative doesn't get to win just for being topical on the alternative. They try to make a permutation, but at the point at which they never explain to the permutation, you're not going to give it any ground at the point, especially when they don't read any permutation solvents. You can extend all of course. His second solvency argument about why the permutation is going to fail because it's ideologically opposed to the action taken by the alternative is the reason why this is going to lead to co-optation. It is necessarily already a dissent to the permutation, so you're never going to be evaluating the permutation. Are you happy on that, Corey?
Yeah, they also just throw out that the affirmative is a dissent to the alternative.
Right, they say the affirmative is a dissent to the alternative. However, you can extend, we're going to talk about this on the impacts level, but Corey extends arguments about how this is going to be a root cause to their impacts and to their claims, means that when they're not answering that, we're going to be getting that. Are you up there? Sure. Links. Extend the links. They agree that they link on the impacts.
The first response that they make is that science is able to explain how this happens. However, the science that they are using also explains that this is necessarily going to lead to the destruction of the environment. The argumentation that they're using doesn't actually function for them. The point at which the researchers have said that this is going to cause problems for the environment and that we're not going to be able to resolve them. They say that there are other areas where these problems are going to be coming from. However, the argumentation that we're going for is that we need to reevaluate our orientation with the environment, and they fundamentally fail to respond to this by just saying that science is going to be able to resolve this. The next argument they make is that we see this as something that can be ordered, and that ordering it allows us to prioritize our relationship to it in order to resolve problems for people in India. However, the argument that we go for here, specifically Core's second story, is that we're always going to be able to justify violence against other individuals because we view them as. Sorry, what do you say, Corey?
When we view ourselves as an institution.
When we view ourselves superior to the others, the point at which they're never responding to this, then we are controlling the internal link to their argumentation here means that they don't get any credence off of this impact. Yeah, Corey?
Also, we're not saying that we shouldn't have any interaction with the environment, that we need to reframe this. You can look to resource-neutral economies such like Zapatista's.
Right, so you can look to resource-neutral economies such as the Zapatistas as an effective reframing of their relationship with the environment. This is what we are advocating for. At the point at which my opponents don't engage with this, they're never going to have the ability to win this. Sure.
Describe for me what the Zapatistas did.
The Zapatistas live in a resource-neutral economy where they're able to provide their own resources without depleting the ability of the environment to provide the resources for them. That is not possible under deep-sea mining.
Okay, they say managerialism stops individual action.
is there a specific reason?
They say the managerialism stops individual actions.
Sorry, what?
They say, okay, so it's that managerialism is necessary to establish norms to prevent the people from burning down forests.
They said that managerialism is key to being able to establish norms to prevent people from breaking down forests. However, the alternative is going to be able to resolve this best. However, you can extend all of the, you can extend Core's case turns that we're going to talk about later on the case about how this is actually going to lead to more problems, how the managerialism just gives us the perception that we're able to control this positively, but it actually just leads to more problems as the reason why you're never going to be resolving this in their favor. Happy there, Corey?
Sure.
Oh, they go for environmental collapse inevitable. We're going to talk about that on their solvency as well. On the framework. Corey, do you want anything?
Kind of. They say that the impacts of the KN policy should be equal. However, you can extend the arguments that methodology informs our policymaking.
Right, you can extend Corey's argumentation that methodology informs our policymaking means that we need to engage our methodology and interrogate it before we're able to enter into policy. If they try to weigh these at the same time, they just allow for the further co-optation, which is the disadvantages of the permutation that Corey reads coming out of the LOC is the reason why you're never going to be evaluating these at the same level. The next argument that they go for is that the proximal impacts mean that we just turn a blind eye. However, the proximal impacts are important because they are the ones we have the most direct control over. We have control over the proximal impacts in the round, over the discourse that we use in this debate. We don't actually have any real control over. India is probably the reason why you're going to be evaluating proximal impacts first. Do you want anything else there, Corey?
They say roll of the ballot is net benefits. That leads to calculative thought that
Roll
allows us to justify it.
They say roll of the ballot is net benefits. That leads to calculus thoughts that allow us to justify violence.
And the environment has to come first because the basis of the entirety of the
environment has to come first because it's the basis of
all further life.
All further life on the planet. You need to be faster when you brought
Okay,
it up.
sorry.
On to the solvency, the first argument that they make is that there are alternative causes to the environmental collapse. However, they don't specifically engage with the uniqueness scenario that we read that we are not fucking with the seafloor right now. It's probably the reason why this is going to be evaluated first. They talk about how radiation is making fish bleed, but they don't talk about how it makes deep sea ocean creatures bleed right now. The only engagement with the ocean floor that we're seeing right now is coming out of the affirmative, and the alternative causes that they're trying to read in don't link to the specific problems that we are describing, or they don't link to the specific clouding of the ocean that we describe as leading to a decrease in the hunting ability of fish. This is the argument that we make about how leads to the death of middle-level ocean fish, which is what provides food for the billion people who are relying upon ocean food. Specifically, you can look to the millions of people in India. This is particularly problematic in the region they're doing it in. India is particularly reliant upon the ocean as a result of the large population that lives along the coast. They don't resolve this link when they don't answer back that they are just dumping slurry at the ocean level. It means that fish are never going to be able to see or breathe because they're literally living in dirt all of a sudden when they're used to water. The next argument that I want you to extend, they try to say that we go for biody. We didn't go for biody.
Literally, you just destroy the marine ecosystem. All fish die, not just one specific.
Yeah, I mean, they're literally vacuuming up everything that lives on the seafloor. So if there are animals down there, which there are, they're dead now because they get crushed in the ore crushers that they use in deep sea mining. This absolutely eviscerates the seafloor. The sea ecosystem is particularly fragile. You can look at dead zones in the sea as proof of this, that where the ocean floor has collapsed, it leads to a collapse above it, because that is key to balancing the very careful chemistry that exists in the ocean. The next argument that I want to go for is the same link term about coral reefs. The only argument that they make is that reserves are going to be able to check back. However, the water moves, so reserves aren't going to be able to check back because there's an increase in ocean acidification. It's going to lead to the death of more fish species. Is probably the reason why they're not going to be able to resolve this. Case. Advantage one. You should have something than this. We're back to insolvency. No, I'm telling you, Corey. I'm going to go on.
On advantage one, there's no propensity for cooperation.
There's no propensity for cooperation?
They've been having negotiations on bilateral talks, which means that India would trade with other countries.
Okay, they've been having negotiations on bilateral talks, means that India is not going to be trading with other countries, is going to resolve the argument that they have here. The next argument that they make is at the response to Corey's link turn, where he says that this is going to stop the WTO challenge. They say that we don't indicate the nature of the challenge and why this is going to resolve it. However, the argument that Corey's going for is that this is going to stop the WTO challenge because the market control of China is going to decrease. However, China is still going to engage in its aggressive market policies, even if its control is decreased in the market, means that the problems are still going to be coming out of this, means we still get access to the link turn. The next argument that they go for is, they don't respond to the no internal link they say that we're talking about Japan. However, China views its right to territorial control over Senkaku as very cultural and very explicit. This is why there's such an extreme scenario here and why we always go to Senkaku for China backlash. You happy? Yeah. Advantage two. The only arguments they go for are extending what REMs or keeping green technology. However, Corey tells you how India is using molten salt reactor technology right now. Molten salt reactor technology has almost no nuclear waste, means that this is going to be able to resolve their energy problems into the future, means that that there is no uniqueness scenario that provides the uniqueness for their internal links and impacts that they're going for. The electricity shortages are going to be resolved by the programs that India is undertaking right now. We need to avoid destroying the environment further in hopes of solving this energy crisis.
They critique straight down, so framework links impacts alternative. There we go. Lost it. There we go. And then case straight down. Should go solvency advantage point next to. Very good.
Sure, can we do order one more time?
Yeah, the K into the L&C order, and then the F into the L&C order.
Cool.
The battle wins this debate because the criticism not only goes without a permutation, which means that none of their impact turn arguments matter, but additionally that they are not going to win any framework debate. Necessarily means that you should be evaluating all the the effects of the endorsement of the way that we engage with the environment above anything else. It means that even if they try to waste some of their policy arguments at the end of the debate, you'll be voting for Nevada on the framework itself. They're going to try to go for these argumentation that they should weigh policy equally. However, you can look to the analysis that methodology has to come first because it informs the way that we view our social reality and it informs the way that we make policies. Necessarily means that if they try to engage with policy at the same level, then necessarily leads to worse implications. Additionally, they say that the role of the ballot should be to take net benefit. They don't provide any warrants for this, and you should look at the fact that the engagement with the environment has to come first because necessarily this is the base of all life on the planet. Necessarily means that this has to come first. Additionally, if you look at the analysis that the illusory doesn't actually happen at the end of the round, means that all of their argumentation just isn't true, and when these arguments go conceded, it necessarily have to come first. Means that you exclude the PM. We are asking you to exclude the PMC as a result of this. Means that only the alternative and the critique matter. But links go completely conceded, which means that not only are all of these disadvantaged to the alternative, additionally that not only means that they don't get to advocate for permutation. That's probably not going to happen because it came out in the last 9 seconds. So we're going to look to the impacts. They are going to try to go for any of these parallel impact terms. But not only are none of these arguments impacted at the end of the debate, they just make a bunch of arguments about resource allocation. But additionally, that they concede the terminalized impacts that this and that when we look to manage the environment in this way, and that leads to inevitable environmental collapse, which outweighs all of their analysis because this is the terminalized to extinction arguments that this necessarily leads to worse implications and outweighs everything that they talk about. Additionally, they straight concede the second line about this, that when we view ourselves as superior to the environment, it justifies any form of violence upon other populations. That necessarily, when we view ourselves as superior, it allows us to justify violence against the other because we see ourselves as superior as to the other. It means that none of their parallel impact terms engage with these argumentation, and it outweighs all of the affirmative case. When they are talking about populations that are excluded in India, this necessarily is what has happened as a result of their managerialist mindset. It means that the critique not only outweighs, but also turns the affirmative case.
Any reason why managerialism means we don't talk about people in India is new?
I mean, Jacob makes the argument that those were the words out of the MO, that the way that the viewpoint of superiority means that we don't engage with disposal populations.
Yeah.
I don't have a point of case.
Okay.
Under consideration?
Yeah.
Okay. Which means that the alternative, when the alternative resolves all of this internal conflict, there's no reason as to why you're going to be voting affirmative. You can look to the alternative debate. They make 3 flipped out arguments that just do not go engage with they might try and go with permutation because on the basis that that managerialism is inevitable. However, not only do they not articulate these argumentation, but additionally they concede that there is they can't see any framework outside of these managerialist policies. Means that they inevitably the inclusion of the affirmative lead to co-optation means that we can never reframe our understanding. It means that there's no access to this. Additionally, you might try and go for this argument that the affirmative is a disadvantage, but when we straight outweigh all of the impact terms and the affirmative case, it means that the critique is going to come first. On the case itself, they read out all these generic environmental defense arguments. However, they don't engage with the specific analysis about the effects on deep sea ocean populations. It means that we are getting unique argumentation about how most policies that engage with the ocean are engaged mostly on the top floor and don't affect either deep sea or mid-level fish populations. It means that we still get a unique story here, and none of their impact defense matters. Which means that only is this going to lead to the death of a billion people that rely on the oceans for access to food. But additionally, it especially turns the case as a result of lack of access within India itself. Means that all the argumentation that they're going for on page 2 goes out the window when they lead to the starvation of all of these individuals. Means that the cases means that this case turns out outweighs everything else. But then you can look to the defense on both of the advantages. Not only on advantage 1 do we have the argumentation that there would be no propensity for a trade relationship with other countries because India and China have been cooperating in status quo. But additionally, this prevents a WTO challenge. Means that China cooperation is inevitable, and India has been looking at salt reactors. Means there's no propensity to salt advantage 2.
Advantage 2, solvency, advantage 1. The case right now.
Not going to advantage to extend the fact that India's multiple reactors no offensive position, go to the advantage, or the case proper. You say that we don't interact with these seafood organs, but I can see markers now, so the deep sea species are uniquely isolated and are not implicated by any, do not implicate any other part of the food web, guarantees that there's no impact on this position. Also, so that we kill mid-level ocean fish could see now, so that deep sea oil mining is already happening right now, and will trip all of these impacts, guarantees that if this was true, you would have noticed the starvation of all the people that you said would starve already in the substance. The dead zones are uniquely bad, that's the MO warrant. We see, yeah, dead zones are happening right now, and probably never. Guarantees that technology devastation, you talk about necessarily level, so that's just a question of whether or not we solve approximate surveillance. That means the impact to the K is inevitable. That we can see now, so that algal blooms would kill all of the life the US is being so important, guarantees the impact to the K is inevitable. Only question of whether or not we deter China. China now. You go for the blippy argument that bilateral blocks still be able to check all trade, so that is incorrect. China still be in control of all rare earth elements right now, and that's key thinking about their issue with India. Well, look to our unique segment. Why would India cooperate with Japan who's known to antagonize China right now if this was true? Obviously, it is not. You should also refer a specific analysis of the Chinese expecting their hegemony right now, that India is challenging them via a trade deal with Japan. Guarantees that we have the most specific argument in this question that is more predictable. I can tell you that even if they do have some minor bilateral trade talks, they are necessarily still acting as if these trade talks are not going to be sufficient to be able to check against this Indian sells compelling interest to get involved in the region. On the links, you can see an analysis of the United States to be able to get involved and would be a credible ally to deter China. This is completely conceded. The link number 2 is that we provide a credible alliance between India, Japan, and the United States is going to be sufficient to track back against all of the risk of Chinese collapse. You say that we stop the WTO challenge, but don't ever impact that argument out, nor do you explain what the challenge is. You also say market analysis that we open up a new market which makes the WTO challenge necessarily irrelevant. This is important because it gets us to our impact scenarios. You can see the China-India war outright. This now goes to extinction, and it's going to certainly outweigh. We'll get to that in a second. You also can see that the story on the Chicago War. Look. Your argument, your xenophobic argument about China somehow having a reason to always go to war in Chicago is not sufficient. We should use for our war analysis that Japan will go there if there's a compelling national interest to do so, i.e. getting access to resources. The only one that solves that is worldly affirmative. The criticism certainly does not. That's 2 independent scenarios that both go to extinction are going to be massive. You shall weigh this evaluate extinction risk recovery reasons some point as the magnitude of the impacts that justifies the extinction of 7 million people in all future generations. You do not access that with the criticism to nebulous impacts. You should also realize this because we are the most specific impacts in the round. There's a massive internal link up on the criticism we'll get to in a second. We are giving you clear warrants that for every step of the way, you should, for our specific analysis, you should not work with lazy debating. You should also front some time for you have no isolation and isolated time for impacts of the criticism, whereas we have impacts that are happening rapidly and very quickly. You should also prevent this on reversibility. So the more we are all extinct, it's not a question of whether or not violence is inevitable. That's fine, because we can resolve it sometime later. If we go extinct before we can solve it, that means we will evaluate the plans coming first.
Also, they don't answer that China would only go to war in a world where the international community supports them.
And China only goes to war when the international community supports them, guarantees only risk of war is a world where the as well as Tesco. Framework. Alright. You give us a blipped out argument that calculated thoughts somehow justifies all violence, no war for this, we say the calculation is probably good for because until that's we can calculate a risk though where they're critical to making relations, you put yourself out there with other people and then use and then justify and that's how you come to understand the other. That's probably heated by your life. So the environmental first because the base of all life, incorrect the base of all life is my life is having friends relationship with other people. So that problem is your root cause analysis is nebulous and not correct. You say that the methods first, but you can see market analysis that say that penicillin had a bad methodology but still had a good outcome, i.e. solving most bacterial infections ever in Iraq had a good methodology, but still led to a bad outcome, i.e. healing most people with guarantees methodologies. That's like indeterminate. It should not say you can weigh the guarantees that you will not be able to weigh the criticism in this vein. You said that it's important to weigh approximate impacts because we have control over them. We said you have not explained how we have control over any impacts of the criticism at all. They are nebulous and not worked out. You do not explain how my having a bad ethic means that I do violence to other people. You should hold them to the standard of the explanation in the LOC and the MOC. It's just not there. Onto their impacts. Crossed by the fact that coral waves are all dead, guaranteed their impacts necessarily know that ecological devastation is question of superiority. In fact, there's a massive internal link up here that you do not give us. You don't explain how superiority as a mindset means Japan will want rare earth elements, thus they will attack Senkaku. You don't have that analysis because the criticism can't resolve that. That's a war that will happen massive and very quickly, guarantees that impact certainly outweighs on time frame. We also say that there's no ability to quantify the impacts of the case. The violence will be inevitable. Don't tell us what form that looks like. Is it just violence in the forms of like not being very nice to people, or violence in the forms of killing them? You don't explain what that is before a specific analysis of this is going in extinction down, so the impact turns to 1. If we don't, we look at the environment first, we don't say aloud for the deaths of the other. We look at the cryouts of the health of the other, the people in Japan that want to be able to get extra rare elements, feel that they're being coached by China, and we don't act to help those people at all. We say that we do the permutations question what the impact turns outweigh, and we certainly do because you are going to necessarily allow for more deaths. Your ethic is, we don't want to mess with the environment so everyone else can die. That's your ethic. We said that's probably a bad thing because it means the impacts that can become inevitable and are extinction level disadvantage. Your alternative also means the violence will certainly come inevitable because you allow deaths. The allowed deaths argument is this a challenge to your root cause claim. We say that when you put the environment first, you look at the way in which people are suffering right now, and then say, no, we don't care about that because you might mess with the environment. It means that you will still allow suffering. It's a competing cost of play that you don't analyze.
I will ultimately vote affirmative for Whitman. I think that the argument that environmental collapse in that world not only decay impacts, which means a risk of the affirmative offense solving for extinction scenario is the reason why I vote for it. So I think this debate is very interesting. I think that the affirmative hits on all the key points they need to win the round. But I do think that the negative has a lot of ways out that aren't capitalizing on within their speech. So I say that's how I resolve the round. I come to the logical conclusion that on the framework debate, I think that the framework debate, I think that it makes sense to weigh them equally given the new impact turns to calculations in response to the arguments that are made within the context of the MO. Additionally, I think the argument is very good that you don't know the specific causal nature of whether or not bad methodologies lead to bad policies. The penicillin example is given, but I think the more specific argument that is made in the last speech that talks about that when you say that a causal inference happens, there's no specific analysis given to how this implication affects relations within India and China, which means I'm not sure I'm able to exclude the entirety from the case based on some analogy that the way that we understand methodology previous action. I wouldn't buy. I think that if a role where this is purely environmental orientation, I think I'd be comfortable with making the argument that our orientation towards the environment outweighs. But I think in a realm of foreign policy, there isn't that specific argument that's made that allows me to kind of exclude the case. So I think that I at least allow them access to weigh between the critique and the case debate. So on the case bill, they definitely late, but there's no question about that. They're not getting the perm or not giving the perm argument because they think that the perm comes out way too late. So it's a question of the impact debate. So on the impact debate, I believe that Nevada is actually accessing systemic violence claims as a reason why as we hurt the environment. And I do think that you access some root arguments, right? But the question is, what does that root argument look like, right? I think the argument made specific is pretty good that does it mean treating people nicely or does it mean actually leading to systemic root cause of violence, right? I think that argument is specifically important given the realm of what type of violence this might justify because it's really important on the impact debate of how the impacts interact with case, right? And how that happens. So I think the specificity of that weighing argument kind of means that your case doesn't quite grapple with the foreign policy relations of case, right? Especially given the time frame argument. So on the alternative. So on the alternative, I think that you guys should restructure alternative. Your alternative should be different. I think you have a bunch of arguments for why the perm preempts, but I think that you need a bunch of arguments for why your alt is able to solve a specific mindset. You make an argument deep ecology, right? But I think the alt solvency arguments that should be applied to case are arguments for why we would be able to resolve a environmental resources better. I think the Zapatista analysis is pretty shallow, but I think that you can make additional arguments for why managerialism also dictates human relationships, right? I think that's the argument you were trying to go for throughout the entire speech. I think that the MO really needs to spend a significant amount of time, right? I think like when I was at UPS last year, we ran a case very similar to this against a very similar app and we lost. I think my advice to you guys being in this very similar position is a couple-fold, right? First, I think parley norms kind of indicate that you won't be able to exclude them on framework. It's very hard, right? No judge is going to give you an out on framework. But the reason why we lost this round is we kind of went for too much, right? We went for a fuckload of case arguments, substance case arguments, and we didn't go for the K, right? But the thing is, when you give an MO on a K debate, I think that the MO should always give an overview and kind of frame the direction for how the round is going to happen, right? But most importantly, the most powerful part of a K like this is that it controls the root cause, which means you need to make very, very clear arguments for why the alternative is able to solve a case, right? There isn't a very clear articulation of how the alternative solves a case, which means that even though you do link, which is true, they link, I need reasons for why the links make their arguments inevitable, and I guess it's kind of weird because there's an extinction time frame argument, but at least short-term so you can be able to resolve the impact before your environmental devastation arguments happen, right? So I think that it's key to really sit down on alternative solvency and how the impacts really kind of interact with the case, right? I think, Jacob, in your speech, like, I think they don't answer a lot, which makes you leave room. I think that you should definitely sit down on the alternative impacts and really extend them, give you really detailed arguments for how your critique kind of interacts with the case, right? I think in the round, I was actually kind of surprised when the decision came out in UPSM because, like, they undercovered the K, like how they went and ended up being a 3-0 because the Aff, turned the case in the exact same way, extinction outweighs, and later, after doing your debate, I kind of understand how that logic comes about. So this is kind of me speaking in this exact same position I was, right?
Yeah.
And again, I definitely know where you're coming from. So I think on the instant K framework, generally, you can make weighing arguments. I think the arguments are not specifically calculation bad. When you say the environment is the root cause of the arguments, you should be making arguments specifically about, like, you're in the right direction when I talk about holistic arguments and net benefits, right? But you should make the argument about ethics, right? Ethics or precautionary principle, or how this argument is specifically, like, more important or comes before. I think ethical arguments are key specifically for this type of K, right? And ethics is internally to other values, right? This means you have a better inroad to the value of life. Also, you make the arguments about systemic violence. Another way out is you can make no value to life in a world where you're ontologically separated from the environment. Even if they win their extinction claims, no value to life has a propensity to not meet their impacts. That's an argument that you should additionally put in the impact scenario, which might give you a lot of leverage in debate in the future, right? So I think those are a couple of arguments you're missing on the K that might help you in the case space. So let's talk about the 1AC. So I really look at the arguments for whether or not environmental collapse is inevitable, because I think that's very important for this debate, right? If they win the argument that environmental collapse is absolutely inevitable, this means that, I'm not sure how to evaluate the K, given, the long-range implication of solvency. So I think, Jacob, the three arguments that you make against environmental collapse is that we're not fucking with the seafloor right now, and there's a distinction because there's the distinction between fish and breathing sea and water, which is an alternate environmental impact, but also there's the argument that water moves, which means there's no risk of coral reef collapse. I think that the arguments that they're going for, that Margaret is making, they don't really interact with this, right? They're reading 4 separate impacts to why environmental collapse is inevitable. Algae blooms, nuclear radiation, oil spills, and specifically the deep sea mining argument, I think, is not really covered, which means that's at least a same level of depth mining argument that would probably trigger your impacts already, right? Which means I think that some type of environmental degradation is inevitable, right? Given the specificity of the warrant. So in a world where environmental degradation is inevitable, I think that I should see who best solves in the interim before environmental collapse happens. I think from both sides, I would like to see more detailed weighing analysis between what impacts come first and what impact doesn't come first, because I think that's an extremely important debate. It just seems that Whitman is giving me a closer impact scenario to the present day, which means it has a propensity to figure out. Also, I think that a bit of the debate on China is kind of undercovered in preference of the environment, right? Your only arguments against China specifically are nationalism and WTO, right? I think you're focusing too much of your effort on the environmental argument. It's not too much given the importance of the round, but I think if you really want to check back the China scenario, I think the credible threat argument is really important, and these are things that should be answered. And there's the station impacts that talk about magnitude, future lives, the ability to reorient yourself in the future, all reasons why I think I should prefer the impact off the affirmative case. So that's kind of how I see the round. I think that, the thing is, like, it came out in the PMR. I think the strategy should be a lot more clear for you guys in the MG, what you guys are doing and how you're engaging with the critique. I think there are other arguments you can make. If they're going to make those ethical arguments, you can make arguments about how, we're not necessarily separated for the environment. I think the argument that in a world where the environment is already being destroyed, there's only a chance that managerialism allows us to change these things, right? I think that's an argument that Gander gave me a while back. I think that's a especially good argument in the context of this situation that you guys should really...
No, you're not.
Yes, good, okay. That happened, right? So I think that argument is specifically critical, right? So that's the argument that you guys should be making. But in general, I definitely sympathize because I was literally in your position, and I think the most important thing is the case-solving case, because especially teams like that will go for, will try to not indicate impacts based on a short time frame, right? And given a world where Parley's not really predisposed to excluding teams off the framework, I think arguments such as no value to life, root cause impacts really need to be clarified, and all impacts for how they engage your case are really kind of the only real leverage against like big stick. We are going to solve extinction now, right? I think that's a classic legal strategy to go for that we solve for extinction, right? So that's kind of how I see it around. Do you guys have any questions?
Makes a lot of sense. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.